It seems like every week a new scandal in megachurch Christianity is exposed. Why is that? Is it different than other time periods? And what does that mean for us as the church? That's what we're talking about today on TBTC. Welcome to the To Be the Church podcast, where we explore what it looks like to truly be the church in today's culture. Tyler and Andrew with you. Cody's behind the camera. And Mr. Murch, how you doing?
Good, man.
We're just on the heels of Easter, as this is releasing at least. And it's funny. We have a question from a listener that I do want to talk about. I actually kind of want to wait another week to talk about it because I want to watch what he's mentioning here. But why don't you go pause if you're listening right now, unless you're driving. Pause and go watch the trailer that's in the show notes, either in the description on YouTube or in your podcast app. Watch that trailer, and that'll give you some context for what we're talking about today. So the question is, in the light of the discussion of the Mars Hill podcast, what does the group think of this upcoming show about the Hillsong debacle? So, to be fair, none of us have watched that show yet. We just watched the trailer. I do have plans to watch that show in the next 7 days because that's the Discovery Channel Plus free trial is 7 days. Okay. So I have no need for Discovery Channel Plus for any other reason.
Even you're going to do it in the next 7 days, not the 7 days after that?
No, I'm going to do it in the next 7 days because I don't want to pay $7 a month.
You've already started the trial?
Yesterday.
Oh, man.
I have 6 days. Clock, I have 6 days left, but I do want to watch the show. So we before we hit record, we watched that trailer, and they're like, "Man, maybe we should wait." But then you're like, "Oh, we could just talk about like the times that we're in as it relates to this."
Yeah. And I don't think I'm not super Hillsong aware. I kind of grew up in that world, and more Pentecostal world, and even like where my wife went to college in Portland, they were at the time kind of connected to Hillsong, that school was. And so, that was we definitely had a lot of overlap being in the Pentecostal world when we were younger with that world. And even a church that we served in up north, there was even some like direct connections to Hillsong people out of the families of people we served with and stuff. So, I almost feel like Mars Hill was one we probably had in recent days here more overlap with relationally. But the thing that piqued my interest on it, and this isn't even Hillsong related, it's just big picture related on the moment we're in right now in the church, meaning, and you see it in Mars Hill, you see it in Hillsong, you see it in Willow Creek. What was the dude's name at Willow Creek again? I should know this. My brain is kind of
Willow Creek
broken right now.
Pastor.
I'm getting older.
Hybels.
What in the world? So Bill Hybels, Willow Creek and that whole deal that ended pretty badly with him. And then now the most recent thing with Hillsong, with Brian Houston, who I think is the founder of it, right, originally?
Yeah. I don't know. I'll tell you in a week. There's something about his dad who had done something, either founded it and then handed it off when it was still pretty small or something like that.
Yeah. But
this is good journalism right here.
I know. We're like, we know nothing. Let's start recording. But these are like major, not just like churches, but networks, right? Like Willow Creek's like a massive network. Mars Hill was a local church that kind of became a network in and of itself, even the Mars Hill in 4 or 5 different states and those kind of things. Hillsong, the Hillsong might be the biggest of all of those in terms of a network, right? There's like a Hillsong network of churches that like all over America. There's a
Hillsong church here in Vancouver.
There is. Mm-hmm. Well, I didn't know that. So, it's like these churches that are huge in the leads and the planters of them who have these major followings, and so many times you're seeing it now that these things are just ending really badly. And I was saying before we started recording, Ty, like, it feels like 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, like when you and I were getting out of college and kind of going into vocational ministry, that felt like maybe going back to like 2010. It felt like in 2010, like the year I got here to what was then called Life Point, like that period of time, looking back on that now, felt like kind of the peak of some of this stuff in the sense of there were there were scandals and moral failures. I think of like, what was the dude? There was a bunch of these dudes back in the 80s, 70s and 80s. They were even like AG guys, like Jim Baker. Remember that guy? He was like embezzlement or something. Was a
huge
deal.
movie just came out about Jim and Tammy Faye, right?
Yeah.
Just like it won Oscars this past year.
PTL, that was the name of the ministry, I think. That was before our time, but then Jimmy Swaggart, that's the other one I was thinking of, who got busted like in the early 80s or whatever for, prostitutes and stuff. And he was AG, I think, down in the South somewhere. But anyway, so these were dudes that like I remember coming up through church in the 90s and early 2000s, and the people who were like mentoring us as teens and whatever else, they remembered and talked about those scandals from like the 70s and 80s. And then it felt like, I mean, just from my own perspective, looking at this, it felt like 2010, 12 years ago now, that a lot of the stuff we're now seeing, I mean, you think of Mars Hill, you think of Hillsong, you think of Willow Creek, you think of these different places, and I can't remember any like fresh scandals from like the 90s and 2000s. There's obviously always moral failures that occur and stuff like that. But it's like, it just felt like whether it was networks that were being formed or things like the Gospel Coalition or whatever, there was just so much momentum behind these things, and things were getting bigger, and everything was just, growing, church growth. And obviously the church growth movement probably peaked way before that period of time, but there was still kind of this merging of like the pragmatics of it with the dynamic, whether it's the music or the dynamic, teaching or the whatever. And boy, it's like in the last 5 to 7 years, it's like you kind of look at it and you're like, where does it stop here? Like when is this? I mean, it's like how many more major church network, celebrity types are going to melt down, and
Yeah, I wonder how much modern technology plays into it. Everybody has a platform, and so maybe in the 80s and 90s. Swaggart's prostitutes didn't have a platform to,
probably keep stuff hidden a lot more back then.
It's easier to keep things hidden, even just technology. Like if I see something or see someone somewhere, easy.
Click.
Like easy to...
Are you the one breaking all this news?
Dude, I'm not. But I wonder how much that plays into it. Yeah. Also culturally, kind of like taking down institutions.
That's a big one
is a value. Of modern culture, I think, in a lot of ways, where that wasn't always the case.
Being the giant slayer on the justice mission.
Yeah. That's a big piece of it. Even thinking through like Ted Haggard.
Yeah.
His accuser.
That thing broke in like 2006, I feel like.
Yeah.
He was a big name back then.
Yeah, I had a personal connection to that world. So like it was definitely 2006 or 2007, based on... Yeah, that.
He was the president of the NAE, the National Association of Evangelicals. Yeah. Huge mega church in Colorado Springs.
Yep, Colorado Springs. But even the way that broke was that there was like, he had been, doing things he wasn't supposed to do. Mm-hmm. And the guy who...
to put it lightly.
Yeah, the guy who like ended up outing him called a radio show to out him.
Wow.
Like called a radio show and it's like, he's like, hey, the guy was like, I'm a prostitute. This guy's been openly against homosexual activity, yet he has been doing this with me, like hiring me for stuff. And so like, so I mean, even the way it broke, and, I'm thinking back, I don't know how Swaggart or Baker broke, maybe in the newspaper or something, I don't know. but it's like radio. And then today it's like an open letter to whoever, it's like on a Tumblr page or something like that. And so it's just so much easier to break things. And I think probably also way harder to get away with things,
Yeah. Yeah, and then you begin to go like, but even when some of this stuff does happen, and again, we're kind of, I feel like I should clarify that like, we're not equating all of the different things we've even mentioned.
Right.
Like we're not equating what's going on, whatever's going on at Hillsong right now. We're not equating necessarily what Brian Houston's dealing with or what's going on with that to Haggard. Or
to Mars Hill.
Or to Mars Hill, right? So I think it's just like, it is like you said, these big institutions, these big names, and it's interesting how at the period of time we're in right now, there's just a reshuffling going on. And I feel like, I don't know. So what do we, in light of the discussion of the Mars Hill podcast, what does the group think of the upcoming show about the Hillsong debacle? I don't know. We're not going to speak to the show in this episode necessarily.
Because we haven't seen it yet.
We haven't seen it, yeah. Which has never stopped us before. So we should just start.
Even things like I thought I knew about Hillsong. I was talking to one of our other guys who has watched the show, and I'm like, did they talk about this? And he's like, yeah, but that's not really how it went. And I was like, oh, so I have the story wrong a little bit. Like,
interesting.
At least like things that I've heard from 10 years ago or something like that.
Yeah, but the thing too, though, to keep in mind, and I like that you said that way, because as we listened even to the Mars Hill podcast, something that like on a personal level I had a lot more personal connection to. And there's ways that, and I'm not saying, that I'm just saying there's just all sorts of ways that things can be communicated or presented, or how the narrative can be framed even. We talked about that a little bit on some of those podcasts, like the nature of how the music is behind so-and-so's talking versus so-and-so other talking. And so this one that you're watching on Hillsong, or that you're going to watch with your free Discovery channel, this is like a secular outlet that's doing this, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah. So you wonder the angle that they're going to come at it from, of like, and I would imagine, it's going to be more of an angle of like, these guys, this guy was a horrible, sex convict, and so Christianity is false.
Right.
So I just think that's a pretty common way that the world would come at it from, and then other angles, and we saw on Mars Hill that like there were angles that certain people would take on the podcast of, hey, complementarianism is this because of this, or this is this, or whatever, right? And so I think it's all kind of in the, how's the narrative get framed, and then what do we do with it?
Yeah, so this might seem out of left field for a minute, but we'll bring it back.
Let's do it.
I just recently read a book called Invisible Ink, and it's a storytelling book.
Mm-hmm.
It's on how to tell good stories, and the author of it, I mean, it blew my mind, like genius level stuff. And he goes through like all these, like some of the best movies ever made, Shawshank Redemption, Wizard of Oz, and his big idea is that the best stories start with an armature. And so like an armature in sculpting is like, it's kind of like a skeletal thing, right? Mm-hmm. To where you create a skeleton and then you sculpt around the skeleton, because if you don't have that skeleton, it'll fall through. Mm. And so his hypothesis is that every good story has an armature that the author knows beforehand, and that they're like, so the armature of Wizard of Oz is not necessarily There's No Place Like Home. It's like you already have what you need. The grass is not greener on the other side. Okay. And so like he goes through, the scarecrow, he already has, the courage, or the lion already has the courage, right? It goes through that. Shawshank Redemption, same thing. But it's helpful in watching shows or listening to podcasts like this to understand that like these aren't like unbiased storytellers.
Yeah.
Right. And I listened to another one that it was from a non-Christian perspective about the Jerry Falwell Jr. debacle. Okay. And it was really easy to see from early on, like, oh, these two hosts, like, here's their armature. Here's what they're trying to tell us through their story. And, a lot of times we can just take what we listen to or watch as like, oh, that's just what happened because it's a documentary. So it's just reality. Where the best documentaries, the ones that win the awards, the ones that get popular, are not just telling you a story. They're telling you how to think about said story.
Yeah, exactly.
And when they do that, like they're coming at it, the best ones, with an armature. They're trying to communicate either, in these cases, Christianity is this way, or maybe celebrity church or celebrity pastors are this way, or megachurch culture has created blank or whatever. And not that they're necessarily wrong in all aspects, but their opinions, right? And so, because I can fall into the trap of watching a documentary or listening to a podcast and just being like, oh man, well of course Adnan Syed is innocent. That's from the like original Serial podcast, circa 2015. But it was like it went back to trial, and he's like, oh, he's not innocent. Like, whatever it is.
When you say armature, spell that.
ARMATURE. A-T-U-R-E.
Oh, okay.
And so, yeah, Brian McDonald's the author of this book. I think he's the only person I've ever seen do it in a storytelling fashion. But like that's the word he uses. Some people would use the word theme, but he says that's just
organ or structure. It says.
Yeah. Theme from his perspective is just too broad and too murky of a term. So he came up with this. But I don't know. That's been really
it's beyond
helpful.
just a theme. It's like, and when you said it immediately and started talking about structure, I was like, that's how you build a sermon. That's you ultimately come to the point of you're trying to find the main point of the text. And then you build an armature, right? A structure and infrastructure that is what the text is saying. But then the real key and what people get when they hear a sermon like that I'm talking about, you put flesh on the bones, right? You illustration, application, all sorts of things that kind of bring that text to life, as it were. In the lives of the listener and improve it and illustrate and apply it and those kind of things. So yeah, that's the immediate thing I thought when you said armature. That's interesting.
Well, yeah, what Brian McDonald would say is like love is not an armature.
Yeah.
Like love is hard and beautiful is an armature.
It's got to be an idea.
And so it's not just a theme. It's not a theme. It's what does that like? What do you want me to believe about that?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
So that can be really helpful. And again, having not watched the Hillsong show, watching the 2-minute trailer, it's like, I know what their armature is, that this place is evil. And now I'm not saying it is, or it's not. I don't know. I'll tell you in about 4.5 hours of TV watching. But,
well, you'll tell us what the Discovery Channel people want.
Yeah. And
what they think. Yeah.
I mean, yeah. So, and some of this stuff's well documented. The Carl Lentz stuff, there's no getting around. It's
pretty gnarly.
Train wreck, and he did some horrible things that are like beyond just like, oh, somebody got caught up in sin. It's like, oh, the deception in that man is wild. Like, I don't know if you know that story, but
I don't know. Yeah. I kind of stay out of the stuff. Yeah. Generally.
But, so anyway, it is interesting though. Cause and then I wonder if, talking about technology's place in this, I wonder if another piece of this is it's more possible than ever for people with less resources and even less talent to create things. And so, I mean, obviously the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill was a Christianity Today paid for podcast by a guy who's really good at making podcasts and all this stuff, like Mike Cosper. I mean, he's, he's written books. He's a legit dude. I've listened to some other podcasts kind of in this same vein that are like, oh, that's a dude in a basement.
Yeah.
And it's like, but sometimes like the line between dude in a basement and professional keeps shrinking.
Yeah.
In most media categories.
There's hope for TBTC right there.
But you know what I'm saying though? Because I mean, like 20 years ago, every album that won the Grammys or won a Grammy was done in a multi-million-dollar studio, stuff like that. Billie Eilish, like a couple years ago, did one album of the year, I think it was, for an album completely done in her bedroom.
Oh wow!
Before she was even signed to a label or anything. And so, I mean, that's a music example. There's podcast examples. There's film examples.
Yeah.
But.
So what do we do as we wrap up this idea before even watching that show? What do we do as the church? And that's kind of what in the days we're living in now, where you see these massive high-profile deals. I just think of like the Christian trying to be the church, and as these things come out from the Discovery Channel or from other major outlets, I mean, if they have friends at work or in the neighborhood that they're talking to, and they see that kind of stuff, immediately those people are going to, like, it's going to affect what they think about Christ, the gospel, the local church, pastors, those kind of deals. And so there's that angle. The other angle too is that, like, what are we as a church, in knowing that the people who come through the doors, as you see more and more larger churches and pastors and those kind of things go through this stuff, or if certain things get exposed, how does that inform how we do church? Maybe start first on the side of the person, like that's how should we approach these kind of things in our local outreach with people?
I mean, I've even thought about this from a personal level, because I have some neighbors who I know watch this type of stuff but aren't Christians. And so I think first and foremost for Christians is to live in a way that your neighbors know this can't be true about Christians.
Okay.
About Christians as a whole. Yeah. Right. Like live in a way that doesn't,
like not dress as cool as Carl Lentz.
Well, live in a way that doesn't that doesn't make them wonder, like, are they like that too?
Yeah.
That's definitely a piece of it. I had another idea or another thought, but it escaped me. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's difficult, dude, because I think this, I would say both for the Christian as well as for like the church, as the Christians together that are a part of, a local church that, and if that local church happens to grow and become a decent size, mid-size to larger local church, there's going to be bigger buildings, there's going to be technology, there's going to be those kinds of things that are there. Because one reaction to this is like everything bigger than like 7 people in our living room reading our Bible together is going to lead to this,
Oh yeah.
Like all things that way are this way. And I just think that's obviously throwing the baby out with the bathwater there and overcorrecting to a degree that is probably not helpful. But I just think like, yeah, I think of like time, consistency. You just can't, you can't like overcorrect and you can't solve these things by something that is a quick fix. Like living, like what you just said, living in such a way that your neighbors know Christians aren't like that. That doesn't happen in like a week, that they're like, oh, I saw this and I'm already kind of oriented toward being suspicious of that. And then I know this guy on my block is a pastor. I'm going to watch him the next week and make sure Christians aren't like this. It's like it takes longer than a week or longer than a month, longer than a year. It takes relationship. It takes like plotting on in a local context with people. The other thing I would think too is like not letting these kinds of things shift the biblical convictions or make you like overcorrect and suddenly go like, oh, okay, well, a larger church and a pastor has this sort of a downfall or whatever else. So that means like, let's break the whole church apart and sell the building and like figure out a way so that people won't think we're going to be like that. It's like, you gotta be true to the Lord, and you gotta be in your context, putting the truth of the gospel, the truth of what the local church is called to be, putting that before the lie of these things. And sometimes that means like just being very local in your perspective. Like I feel like I'm maybe ringing the bell, the Ben Potloff bell here of like, just get off Twitter. It doesn't really matter. Who cares about the things across the world? And like, just be in your local community, caring for people, being the church. And if I don't know, it's like who is the main audience for these kind of things? Obviously, if it's Discovery Channel, that's going to be a bigger audience. But like the Rise and Fall of the Armature podcast, Christianity Today, like who's it? I mean, there's a lot of people that listen to that, but like who's the main audience of stuff like that? I don't know. Like, is that stuff listened to mainly by Christians or like people who used to identify as Christians, or is it listened to by like people that just don't know anything about anything?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Rise and Fall of Mars Hill did have 1 or 2 days, like over the course of the show, where it hit #1 on all of iTunes podcasts. Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, not just Christian, but all of iTunes. The one I listened to about Falwell, I mean, it's odd, but like it's a show called In God We Lust. And it was like, that's what they called the show about him. Sure. And it was, I don't know, like I feel like there's some level of like, I want to watch people burn. Yeah. I can get that way too with other faiths where it's like, I'm going to watch this like thing about this cult or whatever, like
you're a weirdow.
I mean those things are like the Leah Remini girl. Who, like she has King all these shows.
Scientology.
About Scientology. It's
those won a bunch of awards.
That's fascinating. Yeah. You know what I mean? Because it's like, that's different from my life and weird. And so, I don't know. I think one thing that came to mind is that I used to be really concerned that stuff like this would like ruin Christianity's witness to the world. And certainly it's not awesome, right? Yeah. It's not like
not a big win for us.
Yeah, it's not like, great, Brian Houston's a creep, like, or whatever. I don't know. Sure. I'll tell you in 4.5 hours if he is or not. But like it's not that. But it's like so somebody was like, hey, like we could focus on like this man of God was actually a fraud, or we could focus on humanity is so broken, only a good God can redeem that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Great. And so I think that's one posture we can have as Christians is to watch this and not think that, oh man, like good thing we have it right versus a Hillsong or whatever. But
yeah. And if you believe the Bible, dude, and even reading the New Testament, we're about to get into 2 Peter here at NGC here at East Vancouver. Like the whole chapter 2 of 2 Peter is all about false teachers and how the horrible stuff they do and whatever else. And so we look at that and go, this has been going on for thousands of years. Paul names names in most of his letters about like, stay away from this dude. He's actually not one of us. And so I think with a biblical framework and knowing what sin is and those kind of things, we can authentically say in moments like this, like, yeah, that's pretty messed up, right? And then focus on Christ and the gospel, that he came to save the broken. And so I think, it's not going to, you look at it and you go, yeah, it's not great for the brand. But then you come down to it and realize like Christianity is not a brand, even though some of these places treated it like that. Like, it's not a brand. There's a living Savior, Jesus. He's risen from the dead. He's alive. He is building his church. The gates of hell aren't going to prevail against it. And let's just focus our eyes on him and know that he's going to work through all that mess for his glory. So.
Yeah, so maybe you've watched the show and you have thoughts or questions about it. Maybe you have other things that you want to discuss. Podcast@toBeTheChurch.com is the best way to let us know that you have questions. Have a great week, and we will see you next Friday on YouTube, on your podcast app, wherever you're listening right now. We'll be there next Friday. Have a good one.